banking system, like I said, where you're the owner and you get the benefits. Kind of what people do with real estate, right? You think long term, you care about the tax benefits, you leverage other people's money, right? You like uninterrupted compounding, and then you like having use and control of your money and high liquidity.
Hey guys, it's Whitney. I wanted to take some time to introduce you to my good friends over at passiveinvesting.com. They're a national private equity real estate firm based out of the Carolinas. They focus on acquiring institutional quality apartments and self-storage facilities. They do this with private accredited investor funds. They have a portfolio of over $700 million in assets and control over $250 million in equity from their investors. Passiveinvesting.com makes it easy for you to start investing in real estate without all the hassles. They even have an average 62% repeat investor rate in each offering they put together. They even have a real estate debt fund that offers hard money loans to local fix and flippers across the U.S., which currently has a 0% default rate. To help you learn more, they've put together a free passive investor guide that outlines the 7 red flags for passive apartment and self-storage investing. Visit passiveinvesting.com/red flags to download the PDF now. That's passiveinvesting.com/red flags.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Sam Russ. Today with us is Drew White, who is a former pediatric oncology nurse turned modern wealth consultant for real estate investors and business owners. He teaches people how to create their own tax shelters using infinite banking. He graduated nursing school with over $150,000 in student loan debt, which led him down a path to entrepreneurship, real estate investing, Bitcoin, which I'm sure we'll get into, infinite banking, and teaching wealth concepts to others. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Sam. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with your personal backstory. In your bio, $150,000 in debt for a nursing degree. That's not a cheap nursing degree. I'm curious, what led you to get into nursing in the first place? And maybe we can pick up your journey there and carry it forward.
Thank you for asking that. I've actually never had anybody ask me, so I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to it. So for me, I was always an athlete, actually, and I was convinced that I was going to be a professional soccer player. and so, I had not ever thought long-term about anything career-wise. My brother and his wife, they had twins, and their twins were born prematurely, very premature. I can't remember exactly how many weeks. And so one of them, basically forced her way out, and the other one was unhealthy. And so, one didn't make it, the other one did, but we spent months in the hospital with them. And so during that time in the NICU, there was a male nurse. And he was phenomenal with my niece. And so, I was just casually talking to my mom about it. And I was like, I think I would like this. I think I would be, I've never thought about anything. And my family kind of thought it was funny because like the thought of me, changing diapers and all these things were just like funny to them. But I was like, I think I could do that. I'll be honest, if I had a second go round, I probably wouldn't even gone into medicine, but I would have been a child life specialist. What I really liked was just having fun and being a goofball, and kind of, I would get all my work done as a nurse so I could go like play video games and hang out with the kids. But that's kind of what kickstarted, was just that situation with my brother and his daughters. So, and that really kind of was like, oh, I'd never thought about it. I was just like, I'm going to be an athlete. This will be my fallback plan. But yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I appreciate you sharing that. So you go to Creighton for your nursing degree. Did you end up playing soccer at Creighton?
Yeah. So that's another, your listeners don't have time for the whole story, but I'll give a very brief overview. I tried to walk on. I show up to a practice and they don't give me an answer, or to a tryout, and they don't tell me anything at the end of it. And so I thought, well, this is my lifelong dream to play at Creighton. So I said, I'm just going to keep showing up until they tell me to stop showing up. And so I continued showing up all of spring. First time the head coach was there. He's coaching and he kind of pauses and looks at me like, I don't even know who you are. Like, what are you doing here? The story leads to, I actually ended up playing in the spring. The first game I show up and I just pick a random locker and I was like, hey, there's no jersey in my locker. So they get me a jersey. I have the wrong shorts, but I end up subbing in anyway. And I played in a few games, but it does end a little bit, tragically. I came back the next year and they had brought in 11 scholarship freshmen, and they ended up cutting me. They had another tryout, and they cut me. And I tell people my excuse used to be the 11 freshmen, right? But if I was good enough, they would have found a way to keep me on there. So, but I was in denial for probably 7 years about that. I only recently came out of it.
The maturing process is hard. The self-realization, it's always difficult.
Yeah. But it was a great life experience. I learned a lot from it, and a lot about myself too, about resilience, and just like now I don't even know if I would do that, but I just kept showing up. I wouldn't even know where practices were someday, and I just keep finding out and showing up.
That's fantastic. So you graduate college, you go into nursing, you've got a massive debt load. And at some point, a switch flips. For some people, that's a gradual process. Some people, it's like they wake up one morning, like, I'm done. What was that like for you? Was there a discernible moment? And how did you start figuring out what your path would look like outside of medicine?
Oh man, that's such a good question, because I didn't have that spark moment of like, just boom, it switched. It was really like a 10-year journey, that I'm still probably on, honest, but like, I didn't know anything about money. My dad, I remember graduate college. He knows a little bit about Dave Ramsey. He was a pastor. So he sets me up with a budget. I'm not as big of a Dave Ramsey guy anymore, but that's what kickstarted my financial journey, is learning, how to budget, how to do the Dave way. So he kind of set me up with that. I did the Gazelle thing, paid off the debt, right? I got to zero. And I would say that's really where things started to change. So, you get to zero with Dave's system and you say, now what, right? I've kind of only known a scarcity.
Just for reference, if I could interrupt you real quick, Drew, how long did that take, if you don't mind me asking?
So probably about 3 to 4 years of really, and I'd have to go back and look, but about 3 to 4, it really, and
you were very focused. That amount of debt in that short period of time, that doesn't just happen. That's intentional.
Yeah. And I should add, I added my wife's to that. So that 150,000 doesn't even include my wife, but, so my wife had debt too, and so we added that. And the other thing too, is we did take some risks along the way, because I became entrepreneurial and didn't realize that about myself during it. And so there were some things I tried, I tried day trading, lots of different things that I got into, but with the Dave way, why I'm not such a huge fan of it, I'll say, just to be honest, is that it led me down a path of scarcity. So, it's like, you're really just kind of worst case scenario. You got, and just paying everything to this number, which, is great when you get to zero, but then you realize like, I still have a scarcity mindset that I'm stuck in. I couponed, right? I did extreme couponing at one point. and so my wife and I, we were like the crazy people with too many deodorants, and we've recovered. We don't do it anymore. And so I got to zero and was like, well, now what? Right. And how do I build wealth? And that's when I would say, like, it wasn't like a moment or a spark. I just realized like there's a gap here of knowledge. And so I really started like listening to podcasts. I really started looking at myself and, my money mindset, and didn't even realize I had a mindset around money. And so, and then reading books and that's kind of like, so I would say it was like what you asked, if there was a spark or a process. For me, definitely a process.
And for you, it sounds like that process started or really picked up steam after you had gotten out of debt. So you worked that debt snowball process all the way through. And what I like to say about Dave Ramsey, I think his program is fantastic. In many ways, he teaches you how to be an adult with money.
Yeah.
But then there's a pretty low ceiling after that. And you referenced the abundance versus scarcity mindsets. And so for you, it really was when you wanted to pivot away from scarcity, you were done living like no one else, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I agree. I still budget, right? So there's some things I learned from Dave. And I do say, like, I tell people, like, he did kickstart my journey. And that is where I would say I first realized I had an interest in money kind of because of Dave. Like, that's really like, I was like, oh, if I hadn't had this big problem, I wouldn't have found that, like, oh, I like learning about money and stuff. But you're right that, like, really when I got to zero, that's when some more like major change happened. I started looking inward, because it was like, for a little while, it was like, why can we not get ahead? Why do we feel like we get ahead? We get back to zero, right? For my wife and I. And that's when it was like, I need to probably like figure this out and realize, like, I've got some issues around money. So the answer to your question is, definitely when I got to zero, that's when that accelerated things, I think.
Yeah. And so then I think it's 2019-ish, you start flipping mobile homes. You've been doing some day trading for a while. Then you get into flipping mobile homes. Why that specific niche?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's back to scarcity. So I knew I'd been listening to podcasts. I've been reading. Wealthy people do real estate, right? That's what they all do. But I got out of debt. I still was scared of debt. And I didn't understand, leveraging. I didn't understand good debt, bad debt, wish I would have met people who syndicate sooner who could have helped me. Right. And so I just read, you got to be in real estate. And so I read that it was like before, and then I had really analysis paralysis with real estate. Like I think most people. So, the example is like, I was reading everything I could, but I couldn't figure out what do I choose? What path do I choose? And so I read an article that just went down like every little option, and it said mobile home flipping. And I just laughed. I was like, nobody could make money flipping mobile homes. That's crazy, and how
that's real estate. Come on.
Yeah. No. Yeah. And I was like, no way. And so, of course, you know how the internet works. It's like 2 a.m. and I'm now on the dark web reading about how people can make money flipping mobile homes, and so that led me to this guy named John Fedro, followed his podcast. And basically what the real reason for it was I figured out I could get into it with a low cost of entry. I had the cash for it. I didn't have to take on debt. You can provide, what you do is you provide notes or financing for the homes, and really nobody's doing that. The other thing I did like about it is there was literally nobody. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, nobody else doing this in Omaha, but it really was really out of scarcity. And that's why I didn't stay, to be honest, because it wasn't going to be passive. It wasn't something, it's something you could build, but you'd be 40 to 60 hours a week, very little tax benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So it really was just kind of like, I didn't understand good debt yet. So I just was like, well, everybody's in real estate. I'll start here.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. So was it a success right away? Was there growing pains? What was that process like?
So I will say mobile homes are very forgiving. So you can make mistakes because it's kind of, there's two answers there. It was kind of a success right away, but the first one was a big mistake. And so like I learned I would never buy that one again. And actually, to be truthful, that's like my wife and I personally are looking to buy an apartment here locally, and we haven't found the right deal yet. But the reason is we're being patient, because my very first mobile home deal, I just went out and was like, I need to find something. And so it was terrible. I don't know if your listeners want to hear this, but the house was filled with dog urine. And you think I would have noticed the first time, right? like when I went through that,
something.
I noticed the smell, but that's like shows you how eager I was to do this. So it's like, so I just overlooked the smell. I got the home for like $400. But once I started getting quotes on fixing it, it was, I was like, oh no, I'm dead. The good thing though is it was a double wide. Everybody wants a double wide. So I got really lucky on vacation. A guy was living in an apartment, wanted an opportunity to flip it or to like fix it up and live in. And he made me a cash offer, so I didn't have to do the whole like note thing, which honestly, it would have taken me a while to get my money back. And that system is actually, you should get your money back in like the first 6 months at least. And so anyway, I got very lucky, but after that I was like, I don't want to get lucky anymore. So I was like really intentional about what are the mistakes I made. But yeah, so long-winded way of saying it's kind of, I doubled my money. It was a success a little bit, but I should not have bought
it. There are easier ways to make money than dealing with a dog infested double wide.
Yeah. And there's a funny thing too for your listeners. Like my wife and I, before we left town and ended up selling it, we hired a painter to paint it because the park wanted it painted. So I hire this guy, I leave the paint. I come back a few days later and he stole my paint and didn't paint the home.
Oh my gosh.
So just all these headaches. It was
comedy of errors, essentially. Everything that could go wrong did.
Yeah, it was pretty bad.
But I think there's a lesson in that for our listeners. You had alluded earlier that you had analysis paralysis. And if you had waited for that perfect deal, your process could have taken much longer. Could you have had a more desirable outcome? Could you have made a better, hourly rate? Sure. But the important thing was that you got started. You dove in and you learned so much in a very short amount of time that you were then able to take and use on subsequent deals. I tell people that all the time. You don't want to go in ignorant. But there's a big gap between being competent and then building that experience. And sometimes you just have to jump into the pool all the way.
That's totally true. Yeah. And I think that I tell people that deal, the funny thing is they're like, what was your best deal? That was actually my best deal because it made me better, right? It made me like, so by the end, the last one that I did, like I actually had a whole process, and, I basically turned that one around in 2 weeks. I profited like over 30,000 on it, because it was just like, I knew what to look for now. I knew what to sniff for, so it actually really was my best deal. I do think a key to that is, you could make a mistake like that, but you also need to be intentional afterwards. And like, what are the lessons from that? So I did like a whole after action review. If I hadn't done that review, I'd just be winging it. Right. And so I do think there's a process too. You got to like actually be intentional and say, okay, what do I not want to repeat the next time, and write that down? For me, at least, that was key.
I'm curious, what was one of your biggest items that you took away from that? It could be something really big. It could be something very specific to flipping. But when you look back on that after action review, what stands out in your mind?
Yeah, I'll give you two. So one is just, I needed to be like, find the right deal, not just a deal. And so that's a big one. I mean, there were so many, but the other thing is I really changed my model to be, I didn't look for things that really needed a ton of work anymore. And that one needed a ton of work. And to be honest, like one of the big problems I think a lot of people face in real estate is reliable handyman, right? Well, you can imagine mobile home handymen that are reliable is
it's a very narrow circle.
Yeah. And so I really switched to being patient and finding opportunities where someone need out quickly. I'm helping them by giving them cash quickly, but they don't need a full remodel. They maybe just needed one room, needs some fixing. The very last one I did literally just needed cleaned. And so I was just like, I just became more patient. It was like, okay, I'm going to wait, because I ended up profiting more by being that way. I could have done a bunch more deals, but I would have been underwater with all the repairs. So that really helped me like narrow my focus. The other thing I never did again, I let the family like leave a bunch of stuff, and then I had to clean it up. And you don't realize it didn't look that bad, but there was stuff everywhere. And that was horrible. So I basically wouldn't give them the rest of their payment until they cleaned out the home entirely. And then I'd meet them on the last day and give them their money.
Yeah. That's a good tip.
Yeah.
I think a lot of beginners, that's the hardest part. You go into real estate and you have this huge target of potential opportunities, whether you're fix and flipping, you're doing syndications with multifamily, you're fix and flipping mobile homes. It could be anything, but you're not really sure of your lane exactly. And then you do a deal, you do 2 or 3, and you realize, oh, I only want mobile homes that are post 1980, that the tenant will actually clean them out, and that aren't filled with dog urine. Like it's, you start honing in. And a lot of times though, you can only hone in with experience. But I meet a lot of people who are fresh who, hey, I want to syndicate, but I'm up to maybe a 4 unit, maybe 150 units. Mm-hmm. Very different business models between a 4 unit and 150 units. And so I think whenever you can, I encourage people, niche down a little bit further, establish a strike zone, both for yourself. And then when you're going out in the marketplace, you can be more targeted in your marketing and reaching out to brokers and end users, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, I totally agree. And like there were people even in the mobile home little community that I was in that they were fine with really big guts, or gutting a home out and redoing it, because that was their skill set. They knew how to manage it. But for me, that was just not my skill set. And I realized like where my strengths lied. And so I just, you're totally right though. I kind of began to narrow down as I did more. It's a great point.
Yeah. Now you've been flipping mobile homes, but in your byline, you talk about entrepreneurship, real estate investing, and then Bitcoin. So I'm just curious, like, how did you get into Bitcoin? What high level thoughts? What intrigues you about Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I credit Bitcoin, for what I do today, and whether we get into it or not, but with infinite banking, because Bitcoin, I was not open to it, like about maybe 3 to 4 years ago. So for me, I had a friend, we're at coffee with other friends, and he slides this book over to me, and it's called The Bitcoin Standard. And if anybody wants to look it up, it looks incredibly boring. The cover looks terrible. And so I remember he slid it to me, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have to read this now, because if a friend gives you a book and it's their book and he wants it back, you can't give it back till you read it, right? So I was like, man, he's really like set me up for failure here. But I was like, okay. And I read it and it was fascinating. And so for me, I had no understanding of really the Fed, how money worked, how the history of money, and how societies really thrive when there is sound money, hard money. And so I've never had a book in my life, to be honest with you, where I started with an opinion and by the end of it, I did a total 180 on it, And so, cause I used to make fun of Bitcoin people and I'd be like, oh, they're dumb, they're idiots. They're throwing their money away. And I have people make fun of me now this way. Right. But it's like, once I read it, I was like, oh, I get it. And I get that it does solve a problem that we're lacking. There's nothing backing our dollars anymore. We don't really have hard sound money anymore. So that was really what kickstarted it. And then I pretty much from there, like, it's kind of like mobile homes. I learned about it. I just jumped in and was like, all right, let's do it. And so I jumped in from that point on, but the book was really like a big starting point for me. And then that led me to like my career today and everything, because it was like, oh, this is how the banking system works. Okay. So this all like kind of made sense to me. So but the Bitcoin standard and a friend giving me the book was the key.
So it was more of a singular moment for that conversion.
Yeah. That was totally a singular moment. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you touched on a lot of things there and we don't have time to dive into all the ins and outs of Bitcoin, but I think something that you and I were even talking about before the show, but Bitcoin's an opportunity for the retail person, the small investor, to get in on a really exciting asset. And right now we're in an economy that really favors asset holders. Everybody that wants to talk about the top end tax rate and we need to raise taxes on the rich. What people don't realize is you're just raising taxes on income and you're further widening the gap between the people who are working 9 to 5 and those who've accumulated assets. And so you can rail against the system, and there are things that we certainly need to fix. But in the meantime, and I think what you did was, let's figure out how to use the system to our advantage. And a big part of that is accumulating assets. And Bitcoin is something that it's very easy to start accumulating. You can go out and buy $1 worth of Bitcoin today. Everybody should own, in my opinion, everybody should own $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. You just should. It's the best emergency fund you could ever want, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But that also translates over to real estate. And it sounds like that's what got you into infinite banking. I've had some exposure to it, but if you were to give like a 60-second overview on infinite banking and how you're taking our banking system and turning it in favor of the consumer, could you spell that out for us?
Yeah. If people want to dive into it, I'll give them the name, but Nelson Nash created the system, has a wonderful book on it. But the broad overview is really creating a system that I think benefits you, where you're the owner of the bank instead of the customer of the bank. And it benefits you more. And, if we go into details, we can go about how, but most people, like if their money's in a savings account, right? I think the other day I looked, it was like 0.06% is the average savings account rate, right? And if you use that money for anything, for say investing in a syndication, if you had compounding at 0.06%, whatever that is, you've lost it. So it's really about putting, money that, you can use for, there's different uses for it. But what I really focus on is using it to create more, buy more cash flowing assets, create financial freedom with this system. And so you put it into your own personal banking system where you're the owner, not the customer. You get guaranteed, tax-free growth in it. You can still use it to go invest in, say, syndications, right? And while it's there, the money can actually continue growing at this tax-free guaranteed rate. You don't lose out on that compounding that I mentioned that you do in the savings. So, and if people want to get into it, it's, I'll mention the vehicle. It's very, some people are very turned off to it, but it's specifically designed whole life insurance from a mutual company that's dividend paying. And so it has to be structured very specifically. You can't just go buy a traditional whole life insurance policy. You won't get much cash value out of that, much use out of it. It's kind of junk. But that's I would say the broad overview.
Okay. Now, question for you on that, because one of my biggest hangups, and something that I've heard a lot of people say is I compare it to like a spork. If sporks were awesome, then we would all have them, but nobody has a spork in their cutlery drawer at home. We want spoons and we want forks, and you've got this infinite banking concept, but it's wrapped in a life insurance policy. It feels like we're trying to do a lot of different things that maybe aren't purpose-driven is not the right way to say it, but we're using a lot of different vehicles to try to accomplish something. Why do it that way? Is it to just have a repository for cash that you can then borrow against? Could you flesh that out a little bit?
Yeah. So you're asking why do it this way versus
why are we using life insurance to create a bank? Those seem like two very different things.
Yeah. So the goal is really to create a banking system, like I said, where you're the owner and you get the benefits, right? The vehicle is, and that's usually the hang up for people, is whole life insurance. If it was something else that had these benefits, we'd use that, right? So for me, it comes back to like this kind of what people do with real estate, right? You think long-term, you care about the tax benefits, you leverage other people's money, right? You like uninterrupted compounding, and then you like having use and control of your money and high liquidity. So to me, it pairs well with real estate business ownership. And why I personally like it is it's also like multi-generational. You can transfer this down to the next generation. So like a lot of people, I don't know where everybody funds their syndication deals and everything, but a lot of people, savings account, maybe a Roth IRA, or self-directed IRA, right? And those are great, but there's a few where this system, I would say, why you're asking the difference, why it's better. For me, it still comes back to this. When you say, you put 100,000 in to a syndication deal from your banking system with the insurance company, you can't interrupt that compounding because there's just a lien on the policy now. So you always get the compounding going on in the policy or in your banking system, plus the returns outside of there. And then there's strategies that really get, that really gets in depth. I don't want to confuse people, but where, you can set up a loan between yourself and your LLC, you can deduct that as well. So there's just lots of extra benefits. We don't focus on the death benefit, but that's kind of like icing on the cake. You get that too as well. Does that help clear up?
Yeah, that does make more sense. I appreciate you going into a little bit of detail there. So,
yeah.
We've talked about mindset a fair amount, Drew, and how, first you get into nursing because of that traumatic experience with your family and the desire to go out and serve. Then you have to get out from underneath that debt snowball. You start working in multifamily or mobile home flipping, Bitcoin, infinite banking. When you look at where you are today, what's the biggest thing you think that's holding you back from scaling to whatever that next level is?
That is a good question. Mindset for sure. I'll just share a vulnerable story here. Is my wife and I were meeting this past weekend, and we were able to have my parents watch the kids, and we had about 4 hours of just talking. And for me, sometimes I think what holds me back is like I was realizing that lately I've been really defined by work and success there, and not just being defined by hey, like me, right? And what kind of being more centered. And so I think up here between the ears is what holds me back sometimes, right? And still, still never getting that arrival syndrome. Like you have success, and I think sometimes that ego comes up, and just realizing that there's always room to grow and having that growth mindset. But definitely between the ears can hold me back, and then really focusing on the wrong things. And it's kind of like it slowly happens. I'll be centered, and then all of a sudden maybe I'll have some success at work, and it's like, oh my gosh, I feel so great about myself. I'm amazing, right? And then maybe I have a downtime and I'm like, oh, I'm the worst. And really getting back to that being centered, and just everything flows from there. If I'm taking care of myself first, right? Mentally and spiritually and everything, I think it flows from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, that makes total sense. Follow-up question to that. How do you become centered?
Yeah. So for me, there's a few things. I gotta wake up before my kids.
Yes, as a father, I relate.
I have time to myself, meditating. Prayer. I've been journaling a lot, which has helped me get things out. And then, for me also, I'm very extroverted. So I've got to have time just with friends. And there's a workout group I go to called F3. It's actually all around the country. If anybody wants to check it out, it's free, but it's for men. And so I go there and we have coffee afterwards. And when I do those things a few times, of the workouts a few times a week, and the getting up before the kids, that really helps me. And then if I don't get in the morning, try to do it in the evening, right? After they've gone down, and not really work extra hours in the evening.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, Drew, it's been great to get to know you. Thanks for sharing, for being open and sharing some really interesting stories of your journey to this point. If folks want to reach out, learn more about what you do, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So I have a website, ibcdrew.com. which stands for Infinite Banking Concept, Drew. It's easy to, if they want to chat with me, book a call on there. And I have other options on the site that they can go through as well. But that's pretty much the easiest. And also if they want to email me, drewwhite@createtailwind.com is fine as well.
Fantastic. And Drew's pretty active on LinkedIn. He's the guy with the upside down profile picture, so kind of hard to miss. Thank you, Drew. Thank you to our audience for joining us on another episode of the Daily Real Estate Syndication Show. Have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks, Sam.
Thank you for being a loyal listener of the show. Please subscribe and share it with your friends. We want to help you become the passive investor you've always wanted to become, but also the operator you've always wanted to become. We want to be the number one resource for your real estate investing journey. But go to lifebridgecapital.com where you can start investing in real estate today.